The first of our online business studies lessons for preliminary business studies. So these ones will work a bit more awkwardly than our normal classroom does course. So what will happen is you'll be watching these videos. Of course, you'll have a teacher inside the room with you. And basically, when there's an activity going on in these videos, I'll just say, oh, look, you're going to have to pause this for about a minute or 5 minutes. Take time to do the activity and then start again. So I'll let the teacher inside the room decide when you've had enough time for the activity. I'll sort of say you might need about this amount of time, but you'll be able to work it out yourself. So the activity that you've just been given out then is probably the crossword. Okay, so if you have finished this crossword, on the next slide after this one is going to be all of the answers. So what I'll do is I'll just stay silent for about 10 seconds. Might give your teacher just a bit of time to press pause on this video, and then we'll start up again. I'll go over to the next slide and we'll get you the answers. Excellent. So I do apologise if we have any sounds going on throughout this lesson. I'm currently at home and we get all the abnormal sounds that we normally hear in a family household. So let's keep on going. So here are the answers to your crossword. Okay, so a lot of these would have been pretty hard for you, but we're going to go through a lot of them today. So if you did manage to get a good chunk of these, congratulations to you. You are actually quite clever and you know more about monopolies than what you realise. Okay, so we'll go through a couple of these, but we'll go through them very briefly. So number 3 across was former government policy restricted foreign owners from controlling more than 20% of commercial television. So this was quite an important one for Australia, basically preventing another country's resident or national from controlling what was seen on our televisions. This law was actually, or regulation, was removed. So it's actually possible now for foreign nationals to own quite a bit of our commercial television, as we can see with Rupert Murdoch, who is actually born in Australia but is now an American national. Number 7 across, a market controlled by a few very large businesses is of course called an oligopoly. We talked about this one in the other lesson. Changes in government policy being the laws, regulations. When we're talking about policy, we're talking about the ideas that the government have or what their general direction. So a policy is not so much a law, it is an idea or a direction the government is going in. But changes in government policy can inspire new ideas for business. Number 9 across, the company of Telstra, before it was privatised, allowed the government to have a monopoly over the telecommunications industry. So Telstra used to be a government-owned business. However, it was privatised, meaning it was sold off to the public, and then it was actually broken up into a lot of different chunks. That's why Telstra does not control everything nowadays. A monopoly can hinder new competition from entering a market, industry/sector, which we'll talk about today. Going on the down list, consumer tastes and attitudes change, resulting in businesses having to constantly adapt to maintain market share. Those who do not adapt do not maintain market share. Where two businesses have a major degree of control over the market is of course a duopoly. Our famous example is Coles and Woolworths. Streaming services like Netflix have challenged Foxtel's monopoly in Australia and forced them to adapt and innovate. We'll also be talking about that one today as well. A limit on the quantity of a product that can be imported. It is a trade barrier that reduces the competition. So this is actually quite a common one. We do it for a number of products in Australia, and basically what it does is it ensures that a really cheap product, for example steel, has a quota that you can only import a certain amount of it from other countries. Even though it's really, really cheap, they're basically saying you can only buy this much amount from China, for example, So you're forced to buy some from Australian steel makers, ensuring that our businesses survive as well and that they're not undercut from foreign companies that can really spend us. In a highly competitive market, a new business will have to do something different and better than its competitive. And remember, if a business or a market is not competitive, it's not doing something different, and we've got problems there because we're not getting innovation. So let's keep on moving. So today we are going to be looking at competition and establishment options. Please remember to keep on going through your syllabus as we're going through these lessons and PowerPoints and crossing off what we're doing. It's really important that you do that because if you know your syllabus by the end of this year, of your preliminary year, you will have a big advantage when it comes to examinations. As I was saying to a lot of students just a couple of days ago, if you know your syllabus back to front, you effectively know what 50% of all the answers are going to be in a preliminary examination and HSC examination, because in a lot of cases you can just plug in the words from the syllabus. But we'll go a bit more through that when we all come back into the classroom and I can see you again. So, competition in the business world. As we discussed last lesson, it is necessary that your business idea fulfill a criteria before establishment. This criteria includes that the business is relevant, so it must fulfill customers' needs or solve their problems, innovative, unique, clear focus, and profitable in the long run. Okay? If a business is able to fulfill these criteria, then they have an ability to be competitive in the business world. However, of course, on the opposite side of it, if you are missing all of these or one of these, you're going to struggle to remain competitive in that business world. Okay? Particularly something like if you're not unique, your customers or your potential customers are basically going to be going, okay, yes, I can buy your product, but why wouldn't I just buy product B and C? What makes your product so special that I should go for it? Same way of, does your business have a clear focus? Is your business just limping along day by day, or do you actually have a clear plan that you want to do? And is it being communicated to your employees or your investors? Everyone needs a clear focus. So, one of the questions that we might ask is, what is one issue new businesses are going to face in regards to competition? There are many issues that a business might face in regards to starting a new business. However, one of the biggest come from already established businesses. These businesses will have a large control of the market share already and will actively look to push out new competition. This can also lead to businesses attempting to form monopoly. So of course, one of the biggest problems when you're attempting to start a new business is the fact that people are already going to be there before you. Unless your idea is remarkably innovative and unique and ahead of its time, you're inevitably going to find there's people already there. So you are going to come across with your very new business and your very small business, and you're going to have to compete against these giants that are already in the field. So how are you going to overcome that? And that goes back to this sort of criteria that we were looking at before, where these other big businesses might not actually be fulfilling these criteria anymore. And this is your spot to move in and overtake them. So, of course, when we're looking at competition, one of the big things that we're looking at is monopoly. And of course, we have been doing this for our debate coming up, and we're going to talk about monopoly quite a lot. So, a monopoly is formed when a business controls a significant portion of the market, usually 95%, but can change depending on the industry. 95% is how we market in Australia. It can be sort of marked differently around the world and also depending on what industry you're looking at. Okay, so this business has the power to set the price of goods in that sector. So because they control such a massive portion of it, whatever they say the price is, that's going to be the price. Okay, because there's nobody else to really challenge them and undercut them. Now, once a monopoly is established, businesses will work very hard to maintain it and stop competition. An example of this can be found in Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, who controls the energy supply of the town of Springfield from his nuclear power plant, and actively works to prevent competitors like oil from entering the town. Now, I've got a couple of videos throughout this video in itself. Hopefully you'll be able to hear them, but if you can't, just go through the actual PowerPoint itself, which I'll attach to the Google Classroom lesson, and you can click on the links yourself and everything like that. So let's try this one out. Whoops. Doesn't seem to want to do that. That's strange. Well, that's unfortunate, but we'll figure it out in a second. Okay, so we'll just keep on going on. So when we're looking at monopoly, as we've looked at in the class, okay, we have different types of monopoly, okay? So we have monopoly. Now, this is where one business controls the dominant market share. Duopoly. This is when two businesses control the dominant market share, but are still competing against each other. Most of the time, not all of the time, they sometimes work with each other. For example, Woolies and Coles. And an oligopoly is when a few businesses control the dominant market share. So effectively, you're just going down in order of how many people there are in that monopoly. So mono meaning one, duo meaning two, oli meaning a few. Keep in mind, it's a few, not many, because if it was many, then you wouldn't have a monopoly at all. You'd have a healthy competitive situation. An oligopoly is when a very few of those businesses control the entire market share. So what is an example of this Australian monopoly? Okay, well, a good example of this is Foxtel. Now, you might still remember Foxtel. Of course, Foxtel was still active in Australia, but it used to be far bigger in Australia than what it is currently today. Okay, so I want you to think about this. This video was filmed in 2014, and it was talking about the introduction of Netflix into Australia and how it was really challenging Foxtel's model. So we'll try and get this to play. Excellent.
Now, Communications Minister Malcolm Turnbull will today host a public forum to discuss ways to reduce online piracy. The problem is particularly bad here in Australia, as you know, but then the cost of buying digital programs is also so much more expensive in this country than it is overseas.
So why do Australians have to pay so much more for their favourite programs? With us now is the Chief Executive of Choice, Alan Kirkland, who'll be attending tonight's forum. Alan, good morning to you.
Morning, Michael.
Why are we paying these exorbitantly high rates for downloads?
Well, it's really a question of competition. Foxtel is a monopoly. It's shielded by regulation from international competition. And what you see in any industry where you have a monopoly is that consumers pay a lot more than they should. And you see a slow pace of innovation, which means that consumers have poor quality services when compared to overseas. And that's absolutely what we see when we look at access to TV shows and movies within Australia.
I can understand when we were, say, talking about a physical DVD, you take into account, say, currency differences and the like, but we're talking here about a digital transfer of product when you talk about a download. How big a gap are we talking about in terms?
So to put this in context, for those of you that don't know, 2014 is when a series of very popular shows started hitting the Australian film market. I do believe it was around about this time that the very famous series Game of Thrones started. Now, Game of Thrones, when it first came to Australia, you could only watch it on one network, and that was Foxtel. You couldn't purchase it from any other networks. So if you wanted to watch it in Australia, you had to purchase Foxtel, and basically you had to purchase it for a very expensive amount per episode, or you had to sign on into an entire Foxtel bundle. It was a really annoying and big problem. And, well, Australians figured out two ways around it. The second way they'll talk to you about in this video, but the first way was, and what they're currently complaining about, is piracy. So when Game of Thrones first came out, and all the way up until its 9 seasons ended, Australia was the #1 pirating country in the world for stealing episodes of that online and not paying for it. So putting that into context.
In terms of what you'd pay here versus what you'd pay, say, across in America?
Plenty of examples where the markup is 300, 400%. So we've looked at some of the most popular series on air or about to air. So Orange is the New Black, which is showing on Foxtel at the moment. You can get that for $8.56 Australian in Netflix in the US. But the markup to get it through Foxtel is 431%. So it's a huge gap.
Now, you say Netflix. There is some debate over, and I know lots of people watching us access Netflix, lots of debate, though, as to whether it's legal. Is it legal, or are you breaking the law by trying to get onto Netflix in the United States?
Our view is it's legal. People who've got a US Netflix account are paying for access to that content. They're going out of their way, because it's not an easy thing to do, to make sure they're paying for content. And to the extent there's any confusion, we think the government needs to remove it, because what that will do is open it up to more people, expose our local industry to more competition, and over time we'll see prices level out to something that's more internationally competitive.
Okay, so in your view, you're not breaking any law by going through that. I'm told it's a quite simple process getting onto the Netflix site in America and signing up for use here.
Absolutely. You need to have a VPN, which essentially allows you to be using the internet from a US site. And once you've done that, it's relatively easy to get a Netflix account. And people who are paying for Netflix are not engaging in piracy. These are people who are going out of their way to pay for content.
But piracy is a very big issue, and as you'd concede, I'm sure groups like Foxtel and the production houses, let's not forget them, are very concerned about the loss of jobs, the loss of dollars coming into their industry. If we're looking at removing this digital divide in terms of payments, what are the other ways, therefore, Alan, of trying to combat this very serious issue?
Well, I think you've really got to acknowledge the market economics here. This has become an international market, and I don't think the longer we stick our heads in the sand and ignore that, then the worse we'll make it for the local industry. Foxtel is not struggling as a business. It's doing very, very well, largely because of the regulatory barriers that have been put up to protect it. But that game's not going to last forever, and that's why people are looking for ways around very expensive Foxtel subscriptions.
That's right, and Foxtel is coming up with a broadband service next year. I mean, that'll, on face value, even up the playing field, won't it?
It will still cost an awful lot more than what it will cost for similar services in the UK or the US. And Foxtel has been really slow to respond to these pressures, and I think that is a sign of poor competition. The services we have access to here in terms of their technology, the quality of the user experience, are 5 years behind what's available internationally, and they're much more expensive.
We'll see where it all goes. Alan Kirkland from Choice, thank you very much for your time.
So, once again, this was made in 2014. The context was far more different than what we remember now. 2021, almost everyone has a Netflix account or an Amazon account or whatever your streaming service is. It was only really starting to build up in 2014. But we can sort of definitely see how it's changed. Okay, and before this, Foxtel was a very favoured government favourite program. And they used to make a lot of laws to sort of protect its monopoly. This has changed, obviously. It actually still has quite a lot of laws that protect it. And if you want to learn about that, you can read the news and things like that, or you can ask me when I come back, but it's pretty interesting stuff. So, what is the markup for buying an Orange is the New Black episode in Australia via Foxtel? Well, as I was saying, it was 300 to 400%. So, if you're buying a series over in America, you might be paying something to the equivalent of $10. Meanwhile, if you're buying in Australia, it was $30 to $40. And this is the danger of having a monopoly. Because Foxtel controlled this entire industry, they could charge whatever they want. Okay? So how are people attempting to bypass Australian Foxtel by Netflix? Well, like the other way we were discussing is a lot of piracy, and they had a lot of interesting sites of Pirate Bay there, along with a very Australian searcher, Kylie Minogue, who I'm sure nobody's ever searched in this class in the past 10 years. But the other way that I was saying is, okay, if you have a Netflix account, then you basically attach it to an American Netflix account and you bypass Australian Foxtel completely. And this is one of the problems with a monopoly. If people get fed up with your monopoly, they will find ways to bypass it. And because you are a monopoly and you're not innovative enough to sort of find your ways around that, and you rely on regulation to protect yourself, you're eventually going to be overcome. How did the competition to Foxtel's monopoly change its business strategy? Well, Foxtel started going to an online model and started its own streaming services in opposition to Netflix. Judging by how many of you probably have Foxtel in this classroom, I would probably say it was a failure. Foxtel is of dwindling popularity in Australia. Nobody really wants it anymore because it's a hassle to set up and it's too expensive, as opposed to Netflix, where you're effectively paying $20 a month and you get a far more amount of content that you actually want. This report was made in 2014. How do you think this industry sector has changed from then? Well, Netflix is now a really, really big thing and Foxtel is dwindling. So let's keep on going. So let's look at now establishment options. Okay, so this is when you're establishing your business, as the name would suggest, and you're looking at all of the different options that you have for when you're first beginning your business. Okay, so when establishing a new business, it's important to understand that there are multiple options to go into it. People often think that to start a new business, they must start from nothing, which is simply not the case. Okay, in business studies, we look at 3 establishment options. Doesn't mean that there's not more than 3, but these are the 3 that we'll test you on. So the first one is starting a new business from scratch, which is pretty much exactly as it says. You're building your business from nothing. The second one is purchasing an existing business. And the third one is purchasing a franchise. I actually really like these because the first 2 do exactly what they say on the tin. It's not hard to understand what they're talking about. The only one that you might get confused with is a franchise, and that's only because you don't know what a franchise is, and we'll go through that. So, what is from scratch? Well, this establishment option does pretty much what it says. Ignore the not there, not sure how that got there. So, you're establishing a completely new business that no one has heard of before. As such, you will have to build everything yourself, and you will need a lot of time to get it established. This is the most popular option, okay? So when people go to start a new business, they often want to start it from scratch because they want it to reflect their own unique idea and they want control over it, okay? So it's about 82% or 78% of all new businesses in Australia are going to be started out this way, okay? Which makes sense. So we have a lot of businesses at any given time in Australia starting up from scratch. The next one is purchasing an existing business. So many new business owners may choose to purchase an existing business rather than make the time and money consuming effort of starting and gaining a reputation. The benefit is that the business already has an established reputation, which could be negative, but you'd hope you're buying one for positive reputation, and that the services and facilities are already there. This is a really important one, obviously, because a lot of people don't want to go through this massive hassle of having to start up this new business from scratch. They just want to venture in and then be their own boss, okay? Which makes absolutely a lot of sense, okay? One of the important things that you get from this is you get something which is called goodwill, okay? So what this is you've bought a business, you've maybe chosen to keep the brand of that business and the name. Well, people are going to remember that brand and name. They might not know that the owner's changed, but they have those feelings towards that name and brand already, okay? So if you've bought the corner shop down the road and they remember that they've been going there for 20 years and it's always had lovely customer service, then the likelihood is that they're going to keep on going there for the next couple of years as well because they just remember it and they have a lot of goodwill towards it. Okay, and there's actually a formula for working out what the goodwill value is, and we'll talk about that in a reading later on. The last one is a franchise. Okay, so when buying a franchise, you are buying into a small section of a bigger chain. For example, the actual company of McDonald's only owns 18% of their stores. The other 72% is franchised out to private owners who pay for the right to name their stores McDonald's, use their products, and benefit from their system. This is a good way of getting into a business with an already well-established reputation. So most of the time, when you're actually going down into McDonald's and buying something, you are not buying from the corporation of McDonald's themselves. You are buying from the manager of that store or from that region who has bought out those stores from the McDonald's corporation and now runs it for them. So that person that's bought those stores or store is their own boss. And they are simply paying McDonald's for the ability to use their name and use their products and use their services. That might sound strange to quite a lot of you, and basically what's the difference? But you are looking at buying into a business with an already very well established name and very well established network. Okay, and these franchise people generally have quite a lot of independence. So they're basically getting all of these customers that would be the repeat customers going back to McDonald's rather than starting their own burger shop, and they're still getting the money from it. And in return, they're constantly passing on money to McDonald's. Okay, so because McDonald's basically worked out it's actually far cheaper for them to allow people to buy their brand name basically than to run all these shops themselves. It's actually an incredibly ineffective way of doing it. Okay, and this happens quite a lot with most businesses of those big chains that you know. Okay, so what I want you to do, your teacher will have your readings at the moment. Okay, so you're going to complete the Preliminary Business Studies 101. Great textbook, by the way. If you don't have it, I would highly recommend it. You can get it from 5 Senses, and you're going to read pages 105 to 108. Okay, so that's the rest of this lesson. Finish those off and complete any of the activities that you can find in that reading. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you again next week. But until then, we'll keep on having these little online lessons.